بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم والصلاة والسلام على نبينا Muhammad وعلى آله وأصحابه أجمعين أما بعد. Inshallah, today we dive a little bit deeper in terms of how Islam presents sins to us. In other words, what is the role in sin when it comes to our own well-being? And this is a topic that is often shunned. It's one that people don't like to discuss, and when it's discussed, it's taken very offensively. And that is a notion that our sins bring negative consequences to our lives. That if anyone is going through a difficulty, no matter how small or how large, then it's the result of some sin or sins. And this can be applied to the individual, and it can be applied to entire societies. So any society, Muslim society I should say, that is going through tremendous or going through difficulties, it is because of the collective sins of that society. And understandably, people take offense to this because it's kind of like saying that, okay, the difficulties I'm going through is my fault, right? Because I sinned, now I'm going through this. And so it's taken personally and offensively. It's also sometimes taken as more about superstition. That, no, it has nothing to do with good deeds or bad deeds. It has everything to do with your own actions. Hey, what are you doing? And so if someone, let's say, is going through some sort of, let's say they got sick, right? Islam will explain it as there was a sin that the person did, and that resulted in them getting sick. Right? I should say that Allah responded to that person's sin by getting them sick, right? By causing them to become sick. That's how Islam will present this. While people who gravitate towards the realm of science and the realm of knowledge will say that you got sick because you were around someone who had the virus and it transferred to you. And you'll have long debates and discussions that revolve around this. Well, how do we reconcile the scientific fact? Right? Islam doesn't deny that viruses spread. It doesn't have anything to say about that, right? Because it's in the realm of biology. It's not in the realm of spirituality. But does that necessarily negate the fact that you got sick because of a sin, or Allah allowed you to get sick because of a sin? We're going to say no, it doesn't negate it. Both are happening. Likewise, we see quite clearly that when we take precautions to prevent the spread of viruses, it actually works. So, maybe many of us have noticed that the amount of times we've gotten sick over the course of the last 2 years has reduced significantly because we're wearing masks. Normally, a person gets a minor cold 2-3 times a year, let's say, maybe more, maybe less. But with masks, they may have gotten, a cold once in the past 2 years. So there's a clear and significant drop. And Islam doesn't deny that. But Islam doesn't look at Allah's response to sins as being one particular way, that it has to be this way, and that by learning ways to mitigate it, then we're getting around Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's system. It's not the way it works. If you take the practical measures to prevent illness, Allah can test you with something else. Okay? So Islam will look at it in more of the macro sense, not in the micro sense, meaning it looks at it through the more general, broader picture rather than the particular picture. Why Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala chose to respond to your sin by getting you sick this time, and another time by X, and another time by doing Z, and another time by doing whatever, we can only do so much to understand and appreciate Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's wisdom. But the fact that something you perceive as negative, something you perceive as bad has affected you, regardless of what is affecting you, the fact that it is bad is what we as Muslims look at. This is negative. And therefore we say that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is the most merciful. And the rule is that Allah engages His creation through the realm of mercy. through the realm of compassion, through the realm of generosity. And an absence of these names and attributes of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is the result of a barrier coming between you and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. That barrier is sins. When the sin is there, it creates a type of block that blocks an amount of enjoyment that we can get through these names and attributes of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. The greater the sins, the greater the barrier. The smaller the sins, the smaller the barrier. And the only thing that removes this barrier is tawbah, right? Asking Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala for forgiveness. And so for the next several sessions, Ibn Qayyim is going to spend a lot of time looking at the various ways sin affects us negatively. Right? This is going to take several sessions. But initially, he begins by looking at the broader concept and the evidences that support that. So he looks at the prophets and what the prophets have gone through. That when Allah talks about Dawood and Sulaiman, for example, in Surah Sad, the 38th chapter, he points to each of them as having made a mistake. And as a result of the mistake, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala tested them with something. So, وَلَقَدْ فَتَنَّا سُلَيْمَانَ. We indeed tested Sulaiman, and this verse is coming after he missed Asr prayer for that day. And so we look at this, and we look at a lot. He brings a lot of examples. I'm not going to go through all of this. There's a lot of ahadith and a lot of statements from companions or from the tabi'een and the early generation. I'll only look at a few just to get the point across. So the Prophet ﷺ says, "Inna rajula la yuhramu rizqa bidhanbi yusibu." A person will be prevented from their rizq, from their provisions, because of a sin that they have done. And the Prophet ﷺ also says that, I'll just go ahead and translate it off the bat, a time approaches when the nations will gather around you and they will dissect you the way people take from food. Meaning they'll take from you the way people who are on a dinner table take from food. They kind of just invite themselves and they just take whatever piece they want. And I believe this is talking about the colonial era. And the colonial era of the late 19th century, early 20th century, where the Western world pretty much entered the Muslim world and took whatever they want. Britain took this part of the Muslim world, France took that part, Italy took another part, and it was just a major mess. So the companion said, "Ya Rasulullah, is that the result of us being few in number?" Because that would make sense. I mean, if you have a large group attacking a small group of Muslims, then we can understand why that would happen. But the Prophet's response was, "No, rather you are a lot. And today we are a tremendous amount. And we are the second largest group, or second largest demographic on earth. 1.9, I think, or whatever it is, 1.6, 1.9 billion Muslims spread across all the continents with access to all the resources. Yet we are kind of the punching bag of the world, the mockery of the world. This isn't the Muslim world. These aren't Muslims. This is Europe. We got to be careful, and we have to help them. No, we're seen as a joke on the international community. We have nothing to offer the international community. We have no inventions to improve the quality of life. We don't find Muslims or Muslim countries leading endeavors to help reduce starvation. Yes, you'll find individual Muslims or you'll find organizations from the Muslim world that are doing wonderful work. But on the international global stage, what are Muslims doing? We're kind of just there. And so the Prophet ﷺ saying, "No, you're a lot. However, you are like the foam of a river. When we go to the beach and the waves are coming in, that white foam, those white bubbles that form once it kind of hits the shore, that's what we are. It looks like an intense amount. There's so many bubbles, there's so much foam, but it's nothing. Literally, it has no substance. And then the Prophet ﷺ says that our reputation, our image will be taken from the hearts of our enemies, meaning they will see us as nothing. When previously they saw us as, oh, these people are mighty, they're strong, they're not a force to be reckoned with. Just like how when you all first came to America and you would go back to your ethnic countries every now and then, and you would tell the people, oh, I'm living in America now. Oh, you're from America? Wow, Americans? That's something great, that's something grand. You remember this? I remember this when I would go to Palestine when I was a young child. You're from America? Wow, that means, you have it all. That means, oh, it's so glamorous. That's how Muslims were viewed. That's how Muslims were viewed throughout the past, 1,000 years or more. But that was taken away from the hearts of our enemies. And on top of that, Allah has put in our hearts this weakness. The more technical term is the inferiority complex. Muslims feel inferior. Our kids, when they go to public schools, they wish they were blonde-haired, blue-eyed, and white-skinned. That's what they wish. They're embarrassed of their ethnic culture. They're embarrassed of their religion. Even a lot of Muslims, adults, are like that. They try and fit in with the broader society. And so the companions asked, what is wahan? What is this weakness that you're talking about? And the Prophet responded, and he said, حُبُّ الْحَيَاةِ وَكَرَاهَةُ الْمَوْتِ. This weakness is the result of loving this life and disliking death, meaning disliking what comes after death. And let's be very blunt and very honest. Muslims are pursuing this world with everything they have. It's all about the money. It's all about the education. It's all about, your prestige in society. When the immigrant generation came to America, what principles did they instill in the minds of their children? Not everyone, obviously, but most. You have to become a doctor. You have to become a lawyer. You have to become wealthy. You need to be financially stable. Religion, just put that aside for now. You can deal with it later. You just got to build yourself. You got to make more money. You got to make more money. You got to make more money. And even our daughters are taught this. And the problems, I should say in plural, have come about to where it's people are only wired to pursue the world. They're unequipped to deal with life. They're unequipped to be married. It's more about the career than it is about my spouse. I'm very successful in as a doctor, but I'm a terrible parent. Not terrible because I'm toxic, but terrible in that I don't know how to raise this child. I don't know how to be a husband. I don't know how to be a wife. And so this is where we're at. And subhanAllah, this hadith is so true. I mean, it has manifested itself 1,000%. And it's truly unfortunate. And so as a result of pursuing this world and disliking the afterlife or not caring about the afterlife, it results in sins. And those sins have led to a complete shift in the social hierarchy or the social structure. Muslims who were once the civilization, the political authority, the international and global leader, we have become the laughingstock of the world simply because we're pursuing this life. That is the result of sins. And another hadith, the Prophet ﷺ says, if people become overly attached to the pursuit of money and they start interacting or they start trading in contracts that are forbidden, and I'm paraphrasing the hadith here, and they just follow the tails of cows, meaning they just want worldly luxury, that's it. They're following the tails of cows, meaning they're just going after the world. That's their only concern. وَتَرَكْتُمُ الْجِهَادَ فِي سَبِيلِ اللَّهِ, and you leave striving for the sake of Allah, whether that's on the individual level, striving to become a better Muslim, striving to improve your iman, striving to stay away from sins, or that's at the intellectual level, striving to push back against false ideologies, against false theologies, against innovations. Right? And you leave kind of the being engaged in the broader global community. أنزل الله بهم بلاء لا يرفعه حتى يراجعوا دينهم. Then Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will send upon them a test that will not be removed until they go back to, pursuing their religion. Right? And you see this trajectory even today. The Muslims of the first half of the 19th century, I believe, were more distant from Islam than the Muslims of the second half of the 20th century. And I believe that generation is more distant than the current generation of Muslims. In other words, that Muslims have slowly been reacquainting themselves with Islam and taking it more seriously. And what we're finding is that, as Muslims are becoming more interested in their religion and more occupied with their religion, our enemies are kind of weakening slowly as a result. I think that's quite interesting. And Al-Hasan rahimahullah ta'ala says, إن الفتنة والله ما هي إلا عقوبة من الله عز وجل على الناس. Al-Hasan rahimahullah ta'ala says that a test by Allah is nothing more than a punishment from Allah that He afflicts people with. And then it's narrated that Musa alayhi salam said, "O my Lord, you are above the heavens and we are on earth. So what is the sign of your anger from your pleasure?" Meaning, how can we differentiate your anger from your pleasure? Because sometimes Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will test someone with a difficulty because he is upset with the person or they've done a sin, but at the same time Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala might afflict someone with what we perceive to be a difficulty, but in reality it's meant to strengthen us. It's actually Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala caring for us and improving us. And so Allah responds to the question of Musa alayhi salam. He says that if I make your leaders the best of you, then that is the sign that I am pleased with you. But if I use the worst of you, I make your leaders the worst of you, then that is my sign of my anger upon you. And I could speak for the Middle East. I'll let you all from other ethnicities decide where you're at. But let's be very clear here. Throughout the Muslim world, it seems like there is prospect, there is improvements, whether that's Turkey or South Asia or Southeast Asia. It seems like the leaders there are improving. Now, you might not like a particular leader or not. I'm not here to advocate for anyone, but from my view as an Arab, you all are a lot luckier than we are. And we have it the worst. We have the worst leaders in the Muslim world. And when you look at the leaders of the previous generation, people like Saddam and Gaddafi and Malik Hussein of Jordan and others, as despicable as they were, they were a lot more competent than the current idiots that are above the heads of Arabs. And so it seems like it only got worse. But this hadith is being quite clear with us, pretty straightforward. We Arabs, we have direct access to the Quran. We have no excuse. We have none. And, even in the realm of social pride, that you're proud of your heritage, you're proud of your ancestry. Well, the Arabs have the Prophet ﷺ who's of the same ethnicity. Shouldn't that be an added inspiration for Arabs to be more like the Prophet ﷺ and more proudful? But you have the opposite going on. And so look at who's above your head. Look at who's your leader. And decide based on that. generally speaking, I think the Muslim community in America is healthy, because when we look at our leaders, I see pretty competent and well-meaning leaders. Of course, there are mistakes. No one's perfect. Anyone who demands perfection is a fool. Let's be very clear here. But our leadership, alhamdulillah, I think is pretty competent. They're leading the Muslim community forward. Of course, um, there might be some elements that need to be adjusted. But inshallah, generally speaking, we're healthy. But in order to retain that, we need to retain our iman. And the younger generation is quite scary. And their acceptance of sexualities that are inappropriate and un-Islamic, that's a major challenge. And so we need to overcome that and make sure that we don't just ignore it. And one individual said that whoever leaves commanding good and discouraging evil out of fear of the creation, out of fear of being criticized, then the result of that is that obedience will be taken from that individual. To the extent that even if they were to command their child or try to manage their own wealth, they would look down upon the person. And so the challenge of raising kids, right? The challenge of raising kids, and yeah, America does not exactly provide a lush and fertile terrain for our kids to thrive and to flourish. And American society is structured in a way that it really revolves around the individual. And the saying goes, it takes a village to raise a child. And I think, being a parent for a few years now, and you all know better, a lot more than me, I don't think we were created to be able to raise a child on our own. It's too difficult. And those who have been successful in doing that, they are quite heroic people, to say the least. Single parents, they are quite phenomenal individuals. It takes a village to raise a child. Why? Because children, as they are growing, especially in those teenage years, their mind isn't fully developed. Literally, neurologically speaking, their mind is not fully developed. That's why they're unable to deal with situations in a logical and reasonable manner. And so what happens is the child is going to act out, right? It would be really interesting to go back in time and see how teenagers were back then. If they were kind of the same as today, they have these tendencies to lash out and to misbehave. But what is clearly different between now and then is that in our times today, there is no community. If the child acts out, he will find more support than he will find pushback. Back in the day, if someone starts acting out, it's the entire community who comes and puts that child in check. Right? And very difficult times in that regard, but let's look at what's being said here. To what extent is the acting out of children actually the consequence, the result of my own religious inconsistencies, my own religious faults? Okay? The fact that I'm not someone who cared much about what's halal and what's haram. I'm not one who was active in trying to instill the good in those around me and discourage them from doing what's bad. Now, this is pretty heavy stuff, and the goal here isn't to make it personal. Right? And as we began, people take this quite offensively, and it's kind of like I'm either going to criticize what's being said or I'm going to beat myself up over it. The goal here isn't either of those two. The goal is to develop a mindset so that as we go forward, we are able to better interact with our life, with our realities, more wisely, be able to engage our realities, not to shackle ourselves with our past decisions. That's not something Islam comes and does. Rather, when Allah talks about tawbah, and this is quite beautiful, He talks about tawbah and that, okay, look, you made mistakes. Let's say you made the greatest mistakes, and you are the most sinful person who has ever walked this earth up until now. Okay, all of that, how do you interact with it? By asking Allah for forgiveness. How you continue to live is through inaba, returning to Allah, working towards Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So don't let what's being said here cause you to shackle yourself to your past, but rather to enlighten you on how to engage the future going forward. In another hadith, the Prophet ﷺ says, إِنَّكُمْ لَتَعْمَلُونَ أَعْمَالًا هِيَ أَدَقُّ فِي أَعْيُنِكُم مِنَ الشَّعْرِ. You do things that is smaller or finer to you in your eyes than hair. I mean, you can barely see it. You got to look really closely to see it. People are doing actions, that's how they see their actions. وَإِن كُنَّا لَنَعُدُّهَا عَلَى عَهْدِ رَسُولِ اللَّهِ صَلَّى اللَّهُ عَلَيْهِ وسلم مِنَ الْمُوبِقَاتِ. I'm sorry, this isn't what the Prophet said. This is what Anas ibn Malik radiyallahu ta'ala an said. He said, you all are doing sins, actions, deeds, behaviors that you see as nothing. It's not a problem. We, meaning the companions, would see the same behaviors, the same actions as being among the greatest of sins. Hey, what's going on here? Well, Allah makes clear and has given us ways of determining what's a major sin, what's a minor sin, and what's permissible, or what's just discouraged. Let me put it that way. Not a sin, but it's discouraged. And, there's a reason as to why we have that information. So from a fiqh perspective, what is haram, what's a major sin is a major sin, what's a minor sin is a minor sin, and what's discouraged is discouraged. It is what it is. But from a spiritual perspective, right, it's more than that. In the spiritual perspective, it's not just you did a sin, you disobeyed. It's more about who you disobeyed than it is about the action you did. Right? Also, it's more than just, this is a discouraged act where if you do it, fine, but if you don't do it, you get some reward. To the companions, from a spiritual angle, I did something that Allah dislikes, and that breaks them. It tears them apart inside. Why? Not because they're sitting there calculating the quantity or quality of sins, but rather they're looking at it from the angle of their relationship with Allah. They loved Allah so much that even doing something Allah disliked, not prohibited, disliked, tore them apart inside. And they were so tuned to the reality of life and the fragility of spirituality and the intense work that needs to be done to build a relationship with Allah. They have truly understood that, to where even the smallest and the seemingly most insignificant threat to that was seen as a major thing. And because of that perspective, they not only stayed away from sin, they put between them and sin many miles. That was the companions, radiyallahu ta'ala an. So they were so concerned about sin because they understood the ramifications, the consequences of doing sins. And in another hadith, a hadith we're all familiar with, a woman was punished because of a cat. She imprisoned the cat until it died, and that caused her to enter hellfire. She didn't feed the cat, nor did she give it drink, nor did she leave it to go and live its life. So this is a cat, which is, in Islam, something insignificant. It's of little to no value. Yet, because of that sin against something that is inferior in the eyes of Allah, but because of that, she's being punished for it. Something that this individual probably didn't think much of, but she's going to be punished as a result of that. Is it possible that we have done sins that have harmed someone, that has restricted someone from good, or just done damage to another person, and we see it as something insignificant? If this lady is being punished because of a cat, then any of us can fall into something like this. Now, how about if we do something like this to another human being? What is the consequence of that? And the Salaf, the early generations of Muslims, had a statement in which they said the following: sins are the means towards disbelief, just like a kiss is the means towards intimacy, and singing is the means towards fornication, and inappropriate and lustful looks is the means towards intense love, and illness is the means towards death. So this is heavy stuff. Sins aren't just, okay, I did a sin and no big deal, oh, it's just a minor sin. The companions and the early generations of Muslims saw this as taking a step towards disbelief. Right? It's serious stuff. And Bilal ibn Sa'd said that لا تنظر إلى صغر الخطيئة ولكن انظر من عصيت. This individual, rahimahullah ta'ala, said that don't look at the size of your sin, but rather look at the one you disobeyed. Look at the grandness, the grandeur of the one who you disobeyed. And Al-Fudayl ibn Iyad said, بقدر ما يصغر الذنب عندك أو يصغر الذنب عندك يعظم عند الله وبقدر ما يعظم عندك يصغر عند الله. Al-Fudayl ibn Iyad, the spiritualist, said that the smaller you see your sin, the grander it is to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. But the grander we see our sin, the smaller it is in front of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Why? Because it's more about the one we sinned against than it is about the sin itself. And so if we see Allah as grand, if our love of Allah is strong, then even the smallest sin would be worrisome to us. We would be brokenhearted for doing it. But for the one who could care less about Allah and Allah is secondary in their life, then they will see sins as small. Oh, who cares? And this is basic human psychology. When Muslim societies downgraded the importance of religion, then by default they started looking at religious leaders as nothing. I mean, we all come from societies, or I should say maybe all of us come from societies where the sheikh, the religious leader, is seen as kind of the one who couldn't succeed in school. And, let me speak about the Arab world, I guess. In the Arab world, the sheikh is the individual who wasn't smart enough to get into something better. Literally, that's how he is seen. And that has kind of lasted even here in America. People see imams and sheikhs as kind of irrelevant. You really don't have much to offer. Right? Let the doctors and, mashallah, the people with money, let them do the work. Right? But that's the result of the downgrading of the importance of religion in the heart of the individual. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says in the verse, كَلَّا بَلْ رَانَ عَلَى قُلُوبِهِمْ مَا كَانُوا يَكْسِبُونَ. What we acquire in sin causes our hearts to become stale, causes our hearts to harden. And what happens with a lot of people is that when they do a sin, they don't see an immediate consequence. A person does a sin, it's like, okay, what's gonna hit me now? I'm gonna do the sin and something's gonna come and attack me, right? They have this perception that if I do a sin, then the response is immediate. Sometimes it could be immediate, but not necessarily. And so what ends up happening is they do the sin, nothing happens, okay. Another sin, nothing happens, okay. A third sin, nothing happens, okay. I'm still getting good grades, I'm making money, my life is going forward, I don't see any effects or any harms, therefore this sin stuff is nonsense. And so they develop this perception. And the reality is that sins do have an immediate consequence, but those consequences don't manifest itself right away. And so every time we do a sin, as the hadith says, every time we do a sin, a black dot forms on our hearts. And the more sins we do, the more black dots. And the more black dots, the harder our hearts become. And so it's like an illness. If you take a small amount of a virus, you're not going to feel it. But if you take a large amount of that virus, it's gonna come after you. If you take small amounts of radiation, you might not feel it. But if you keep taking in radiation, that's going to develop into cancer. It might not happen overnight. It might happen over 20 years. But in the end, cancer has come about. So this is one mistake people have when it comes to their perception of sins. Another mistake is that they think sins only affect our worldly well-being, our livelihood. Okay, I did a sin, my job is still intact. I've been doing sins and I get promotions. I'm doing sins, but my income keeps growing. Okay, it looks like I'm good. Right? Now, sometimes sins will affect a person's worldly well-being. But other times, it's not affecting their worldliness. It's affecting their spirituality. And so they might have, and they might continue to have, the cleverness to be successful in this world. But as soon as they start engaging religiosity, it's like, I can't grasp this. It makes no sense. I don't understand what Allah is saying. Or they begin to say that, oh, this stuff is insignificant. We need to reframe it. We need to change it. That right there is scary. That right there is terrible. Someone who has an inability to understand Allah's commands and what Allah wants of you, and the person who has the inability to be connected to the afterlife and be concerned about their well-being in the afterlife, that is scary. For the practicing Muslims, those who Allah loves, right? Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will expiate their sins through worldly difficulties, but He preserves their iman. For those who are extremely distant from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, He preserves their worldliness. But where are the sins affecting? Their iman, their heart. To the extent that the individual might say, I mean, who cares about religion? I mean, is this religious stuff even important? It starts to develop hypocrisy. And so this is really scary stuff. And for the one who when they sin, it affects their worldliness, then alhamdulillah, that person is healthy in terms of their iman. But the one who, when they sin, it affects their worldliness, it doesn't affect their worldliness in the least, then we have to ask the question, what is it affecting? Right? And so the wealthy, non-religious person, the one who doesn't pray, the one who might be doing many major sins, but they're having all of this wealth and all of this worldliness and fun in the world, that's scary. From in a spiritual perspective, that's extremely scary. Now, before we enter into the various consequences of sins, what was I going to say? I forgot what I was going to say. Oh, yes. We need to realize that we have multiple facets of experience. We experience through our worldliness, the world. We experience through our mind, and we experience through our souls. So mind, body, and soul, or we can say instead of soul, our hearts. We experience in all of these things. And so sins can affect one of these or more. But we need to also understand that when one is ailing tremendously, it will by default begin to affect the other two. It will by default begin to affect the other two. And so the wise Muslim is someone who takes care of all of it. Takes care of all of it. And so, to give you an example, when a practicing Muslim who is dedicated most or all of their life to the promotion of Islam, da'wah and stuff, what happens to such individuals is that they don't really spend much time developing their financial well-being. They don't consider the future of their work in terms of their financial well-being. And what happens is they go through major financial distress. And as a result of that major distress, it begins to affect their spirituality. And they begin to ask questions like, or contemplate and consider questions like, why did I choose to do this in the first place? Why? I wish I became a doctor, not a religious scholar. I wish this and I wish that. See this mindset? This mindset is dangerous. Why? Because it is a neglection of Allah's blessings. Allah has blessed you with Islamic knowledge. He has blessed you with this ambition to strive in the path of Allah. But that's very fragile. If a person begins to say, why did I even do this in the first place? That is a rejection of Allah's blessings. And when we reject Allah's blessings, there are consequences to that. So a wise Muslim is someone who takes care of all of it. It doesn't mean they split it evenly, for example. It doesn't have to be like that. But they need to take care of their spirituality by taking care of their financial well-being. Another problem that we find in contemporary religious leaders here in America is that their marriage life is not good. Their marriage life isn't good. It's not healthy. Now, this religious leader finds himself stuck because he cannot go and ask for help for two reasons. Number one, the shame that the person will feel in front of the broader community if word gets out. And number two, this person is expected to help other people have healthy marriages. So how can he help other people to have healthy marriages when his marriage itself isn't healthy? And so we find this. Also, because of the financial strain and the workload, it affects their relationship with their family. They don't have time for their family. And the wife is always stressed out because there's not enough money and I can't do anything. And why couldn't you become something else? And so it stresses the person out, and then these questions come about. I really wish I didn't become a religious leader. I really wish that, I pursued something else. Or they might even consider career changing. There are many imams or many students of knowledge, scholars, who aren't imams simply because of the poor situation of imams in terms of their career. Right? And so the point I'm trying to make here isn't to kind of specify iman, but to give you an example. In order to keep your iman healthy, right, we need to stay away from sins. But in order to stay away from sins, you need to take care of your body, you need to take care of your mind, and you need to take care of your heart. You have to develop all three. You have to educate yourself on all three. And so part of helping yourself thrive in iman is making sure you don't need to worry about the world. You need to worry about the afterlife. But if you're worried about your worldly well-being, you're afraid you're not going to make ends meet, then how are you going to worry about the afterlife? We human beings, by simple rationale, we worry about the here and now before we worry about the future. If the here and now, I don't know if I'm going to be able to pay my bills, how are they going to sit there thinking about the afterlife? Right? Yes, part of the growth of the human being is to go through struggles. But the idea is that not to neglect in the long term one of these, to put yourself on a path where you develop all three. Right? Okay. So with that, we enter into what Ibn al-Qayyim rahmatullah alayhi calls the consequences of sins. There are 54, I believe. Yes, 54 consequences of sins. And this is pretty serious stuff. Right? And I hope when we go through these that you find ways to understanding the negativity of sins that you didn't really think about and consider before. And I'll just give you the first one for now. And that is hirmanul ilm, being deprived of knowledge. Okay. You might think, who cares? Who cares? A lot of these business people who are multimillionaires, they're not people of knowledge. And, who cares to know about the ins and outs and the nuanced information when it comes to Islam? And by the way, when we talk about knowledge here, we're talking about Islamic knowledge. We're not talking about just any knowledge. We're talking about Islamic knowledge here. You might think, who cares? And the response to that is the following. There are two qualities that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala pointed to when he spoke, the first time he spoke about the creation of humanity. What are they? Knowledge and language. Knowledge and language. This is what makes the human being. Knowledge and language. And so think about it. Societies that have higher rates of illiteracy, what does their language tend to be? How do they engage each other? Now, I don't mean to bash about anyone. What we're doing here isn't to judge people. What we're doing here is to try and better understand the seriousness of this, this consequence. When humanity or societies, they start to lag behind when it comes to education, lag behind when it comes to knowledge, what happens to those societies? They just slowly become weaker and weaker and weaker and weaker. Individuals who do not know how to express themselves, how do they tend to express themselves? I should say, let me specify here. People who don't know how to use words to express themselves, how do they end up expressing themselves? Through this thing right here. This? There's a smack. And, I know that might cause us to chuckle, but a lot of parents, because they don't educate themselves about the challenges of their children, they don't know how to talk to their children. And because they don't know how to talk to their children, whenever the child asks something or the child misbehaves, what do they resort to? The screaming, the wallahi, you're going to get it? I don't know what the hand motion is in other parts of the Muslim world, but in the Arab world, it's this, right? And here in America, it's A-okay, you did a good job, but in the Arabs, this is, I'm gonna get you. You're going to get it hard. The slipper is coming. Right? This is how, in the Arab world too, I guess with all mothers, that's the closest thing they have, right? You just take it off their foot and bam, give it a good toss, right? This is what they resort to. The child asks, Baba, Mama, how do I know Allah is real? What happens to the parents? Panic mode. Oh my God, my child is going to become an atheist. Oh my God, my child is questioning their faith. And the response is, how dare you ask that question? But guess what? When we educate ourselves, we find that this is a perfectly valid and normal question that the Quran engages. The Quran talks about this. Not only that, when we educate ourselves with the realities of our children, we know that this is a question being asked by their peers. There's nothing wrong with it. But because the parent is unable to answer because they did not educate themselves, what happens to the child? What happens to their relationship with the child? It becomes rocky. And the children rebel. Why? Because guess what? Teenagers, that's how they are. That's how Allah created them. They literally cannot behave. It's like demanding a 3-year-old child to just sit down. He wasn't created to be able to just sit down. That's not how Allah created him. All of this goes back to this lack of knowledge. When we lack the knowledge, we lack the ability to express ourselves. We lack the ability to build relationships. We lack the ability to discipline ourselves and our children. We lack the ability to build a society, to build a community, to build anything. And so what happens when we are restricted from Islamic knowledge? How on earth are we going to succeed in the next life when we don't have the primary means to succeeding in the next life? And that is knowing what needs to be done. Knowing what is halal and what is haram. And so again, this sounds simple. It sounds like, oh, who cares if I don't know the ins and outs? Now, what kind of a punishment is this? And what I say, Ibn Qayyim put this first for a reason. When he is a scholar, he put this first for a reason. That is, this is the most serious, if not, or I should say, one of, if not the most serious consequence. What happens to the individual when they're not educated? It's not good. It's not healthy for society. It's not healthy for anyone. And by educated, I don't mean they necessarily have a college degree, but they've spent some time to develop themselves. That's what education is. It's self-development. Allahu ta'ala alam. We'll go ahead and stop here and continue next time with the various consequences of sins. And we ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to make us among the obedient. Ameen ya Rabbal Alameen. Wa sallallahu ala nabiyyina Muhammad wa ala alihi wa ashabihi ajma'in.